Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Omar Shakir, the Israel and Palestine Director at Human Rights Watch, and Dan Diker, a former Director General of the World Jewish Congress and now a Senior Fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Omar Shakir, 1 year on since those protests began at the border, the Great March of Return. According to the best available estimates, World Health Organization estimates, 258 Palestinians killed, including at least 49 children. Help me understand the human side of this and the humanitarian impact of those protests and the Israeli response.
Absolutely. So Palestinians, for much of the last year, have taken to the fences between Israel and Gaza to protest Israel's over decade-long closure of the Gaza Strip, among other things. And this has been met by the Israeli forces by use of not just excessive force. We're not talking here about some soldiers going beyond orders, but we're talking about repeated killings of protesters outside of circumstances where they posed an imminent threat to life, which is the legal standard under international human rights law. They were following expansive orders that permitted them to fire on people who didn't pose a threat as required under international law. The Commission of Inquiry found 189 Palestinian protesters killed, 187 of those killings unlawful in circumstances that were as I described. These are people that in many cases, with unemployment over 56%, with the economic situation as dire as it is, going to the border really as a cry for help, for their situation to be heard, to understood, and they've been met by brutal force. The Commission of Inquiry said these acts may amount to war crimes, which mirrors our own findings, and even crimes against humanity. So we're talking about very serious violations, and we're afraid that we're going to see a replay of those this Saturday because there's been no accountability. A complete whitewash operation by the Israeli army. What's needed now is accountability at an international level, including by the international criminal courts.
Dan Diker, do you believe that the Israeli army's response to the protests was justified?
Imran, what we've just heard is a whitewashing of 12 months of Iranian regime-backed Hamas with malice aforethought, terror and political warfare program in order to use its own citizens as human shields. I mean, what we've just heard is basically a political diatribe with complete unsubstantiated claims against the Israeli army, which frankly, as those who know anything about human rights and international law know, that Israel sets the standard for human rights in conflict zones. And if you want proof of that, just go and ask the British commander, former British commander in Afghanistan, who has testified before the United Nations on that very point. The notion that Human Rights Watch and other international human rights organizations refuse to investigate the Iranian regime's $100 million program in order to sacrifice, with Hamas's operational support, children and women in Gaza. Israel's open fire orders are among the strictest in the world, and they only open fire on people, the vast majority of whom, in the case of Gaza, were Hamas operatives that are trying to cut through the border fence to kill and capture Israeli citizens.
Omar?
The international standards here are quite clear. You can only use lethal force, including live ammunition, when you face an imminent threat to life. Quite simply, being in a no-go zone, even damaging a fence, whether it be the U.S.-Mexico border, whether it be the fences separating Gaza and Israel, is not an excuse to open fire. This is not some position that Human Rights Watch has articulated on its own. It's the standards enshrined in international law. It repeats findings that the Commission of Inquiry, many other organizations have repeated. The reality is we've documented abuses by all parties, including Hamas's recent crackdown on dissent. But the fact that and by the way, it's many of the same protesters who were on the fence that are the ones being cracked down by in the recent episode in Gaza. The fact that somebody's Hamas is not a license to open fire and kill them. If you had a protest in New York City in which you even had ex-felons on the street, that would not permit the U.S. police to gun them down, including clearly marked journalists and medics. Quite simply, what we are telling you is the result of months of our own investigations and independent investigations done by other international advocates. You can take that or some assertion from somebody who hasn't spent that time documenting that these are Iranian-backed whatevers. That has nothing to do with use of force. It turns on what circumstances did you fire on individuals. And the Israelis, by their own admission in a petition to the Supreme Court, argued for the right to do so in a way that's flagrantly in violation of international law.
Dan, come in.
You know, Omar uses the words international law and has very little understanding of what he's talking about, because anybody who knows anything about international law knows that there are no international standards for dealing with international terrorist groups like the Islamist Hamas, backed by the Iranian regime. The fact that Human Rights Watch has completely failed to investigate how the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, paying $350 million to people to sacrifice their lives, to get pensions for life, for becoming shaheeds, for becoming martyrs, and Hamas paying $3,000 per family, none of that appears in Human Rights Watch reporting on Gaza. And those are the motivations. Martyrdom. Those are the motivations for terrorists to approach the fence and try to kill and kidnap Israelis. You know, Imran, the Hamas has fired in the last year alone 1,300 rockets, mortars, and incendiary devices to try to kill Israelis, as a family of 6 was nearly killed last week. And Israel has done nothing, frankly, as other countries would do, in order to reconquer the Gaza Strip, in order to destroy the infrastructure that the Hamas has created. Human Rights Watch has done nothing to investigate the Iranian and North Korean weaponry that is completely poisoned the Gaza Strip.
You made the point. Dan, let me ask you something. Omar has made the point, and this has been well documented, that a lot of the protesters who go to the border every week, and especially a lot of the protesters who were there last summer at the height of it, are those who are on the streets today against Hamas. Hamas is beating them up, right? They're protesting things like...
Hamas is doing worse than beating them up.
Okay,
Hamas is torturing its own people.
And listen, we spoke about this 2 days ago, and Omar was debating someone from Hamas who was calling him names and questioning his credibility, as you are right now. But be that as it may, let me ask you, Dan, if their plan is martyrdom, why are they protesting lack of jobs? Why are they protesting fuel prices? Why are they protesting taxes? Because they'd want to be martyrs, wouldn't they? Why would they care about the lack of jobs in Gaza?
We have to make a distinction, Imran, about what's happening in Gaza. The good people of Gaza, which is the vast majority of the Gazan people, let's remember, there were hundreds of thousands of people who protested over the last year, and 258 people were killed, and the vast majority by Israeli fire, and the vast majority of those people by Hamas's admission itself. Just ask Dr. Bardawil, just ask Hassim Qasem, who is a spokesman for the Hamas. They'll tell you, it's all on the internet. They will tell you themselves that those are the people that are shaheedim, that are martyrs for Hamas, for the Islamist cause. Having said that, the vast majority of Gazans are being starved by their own leadership and by the PA leadership in Ramallah that has cut salaries by 50%, that refuses to pay for utilities so that Gazan people can live in peace and in justice under their own leadership. Let's remember one last point. It was a full 24 months before Israel imposed a full closure on the Hamas-led Gaza Strip. From Israel's point of view, Gaza today is led by a terrorist entity, and therefore it is an enemy entity. It is to which the regular international law governing two sovereigns at war does not apply whatsoever. Having said that, Israel has the strictest, and I repeat, the strictest self-limitations on the use of force even in a terror conflict zone of any democratic country in the world, period, full stop. And I defy anybody to prove differently.
Okay, Omar, very briefly, please. A response from you finally, Omar.
Absolutely. I mean, he's changing the topic because he can't defend the fact that soldiers were picking off demonstrators that didn't pose an imminent threat to life. The standard, if a police opens fire in a demonstration anywhere in the world and kills someone, and later it turns out that person was a gang member, that's not a justification. The standards here are the law that applies in policing situations. Human Rights Watch has been very critical.
This is not a policing situation, Omar. This is a situation of international terrorism, and therefore you've proven yourself to be completely wrong on this issue, because it's not a policing issue. We're not in New York. We're not in Chicago. We are talking about an international, self-proclaimed and internationally recognized designated terror organization by the United States and the European Union, who is trying to cut through a sovereign border. That's an act of terrorism. That's a casus belli, and every country has the right to open fire to prevent their borders from being hostilely crossed.
You can make up your own rules as you wish, but that's not what international law is. There's standards on policing, whether that policing be Israel with protesters in front of them, whether it be anywhere in the world. We apply the same rules everywhere. It's the same rules we apply when we look at the human rights standards of the PA, Hamas, or Israel. You just don't like it because you don't like the answer, which is that Israeli forces likely committed.
No, I like it. I just don't. I don't like lies, fabrications.
Gentlemen.
Lies and fabrications by politically driven organizations that call themselves human rights will just simply not cut it. Not you and not anyone else.
Let me thank you both. Let's get the perspective from within Gaza now, where we're joined by Hamas's former health minister, Basem Naim. Mr. Naim, thanks for joining us. You heard what preceded you there. The perspective from the Israelis is that Hamas is sacrificing the lives of innocent people by pushing them to the border to be killed by the Israelis. Is that what's happening?
Thank you very much. But I have to say the organization of your program was that I should not have a chance to meet with this criminal in the same program, and therefore I am not happy to hear such a killer talking on behalf of international law.
We invite all perspectives. You're speaking after him. You're not even talking to him directly. So if you could answer my question, I'd appreciate it.
Yes.
We'll organize the program now. We're having you afterwards. And we thank you for joining us. So please go ahead, answer the question.
Second, if he really talking about respecting human rights law, why he was scared to allow many of human rights committees to investigate the events around the fence. Second, we are not talking about a border. Israel itself, it doesn't recognize it as a border. They are talking about a security fence. Third, by international law, Gaza Strip is still an occupied territory, and Israel is the occupying power, and Israel is responsible for the life of 2 million people. It is not allowed to blackmail 2 million people because the Israelis are not happy with this government or with this government. Third, as Omar said, it is not an excuse to kill someone because he is affiliated to Hamas or Fatah or PFLP or Jihad, who is protesting peacefully. And this is also fixed by the international inquiry independent committee to investigate the events around the fence, which is not a border, even by Israel. It is not recognized as a border. That these peaceful, these demonstrations were peacefully, popular, peaceful demonstrations around the border. Most of the videos, most of the events where young people and women and children killed were at least 200, 300, or 400 meters away from the fence. People of Gaza, they are not trying to penetrate a legitimate, recognized, internationally recognized borders. They are knocking the doors of a prison, an open-air prison, to call for a dignified and free life.
Okay, and let me ask you then, because this is a year since the protest began and about 9 months since the height of the protests, hundreds of Palestinians died, many children, as we mentioned, died. The blockade is still in place. The siege is still in place. The occupation is in place. There's no right of return for the people. And it's almost well known that if the people move towards the border, the Israelis, whatever their reasons, whatever their excuse, they're going to gun people down, whether people are Hamas or not. Is it still then worth it to have Palestinians in Gaza lose their lives over these protests?
First of all, it is always worthy to protest for dignity and freedom. It is not acceptable from Gazans to accept to die in peace and to die in hunger and to die in poverty and to die because of illnesses here and there. There is no choice. But this, sorry to describe it, this shameful situation should be directed to the international community first and to Israelis second, because the international community have the tools to oblige the Israelis to respect the international law, and Israel as an occupying power have to respect the international law and to care for 2 million people, the life of 2 million people. It is not allowed simply to watch Israelis gunning down children and women and keeping silent, or by being part of a quartet, which, I mean, including the UN, which is besieging the Gaza Strip. I think that the right response to these criminal, brutal policies of the Israelis is to announce lifting the siege immediately and unconditionally, and giving 2 million Palestinians to live like any people around the world in dignity and freedom.
Right. Basem Naim, pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. I thank you very much for joining us. And earlier, Omar Shakir from Human Rights Watch and Dan Diker as well. Thanks again.